There are lots of different types of miniatures games out there, obviously. I've been talking about them on the channel for quite a good long time now, and it can be kind of daunting if you're new to tabletop wargaming to try to figure out what kind of game you want to play. Obviously, you want to try to find out what your friends are playing, or if you're the first one of your friends, what you think you can convince or maybe trick your friends into playing. There's not just different games out there, there's also different types of games. The one that I'm talking about today is going to be something that I've been a big fan of now for a good number of years, and it's called the Skirmish Game. Now, skirmish is a word that has a definition. You could look it up in the dictionary, but it's not exactly what we're talking about in tabletop wargaming when we talk about a skirmish. A skirmish game is a game that uses, honestly, just a smaller amount of physical miniatures than, say, a bigger game, an army game. Those are the kind of two classifications in types of tabletop wargaming. You've got your army games, which are going to be things like Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40K, games like most Napoleonics and historicals. A lot of those, just you've got a ton of figures, 50, 60, 70, 80, 200 figures per side. That's very daunting to a person who's new to miniatures. But then there's, on the other spectrum, the skirmish game. And I think skirmish games are, well, they're certainly growing in popularity, and I think I know why. So a skirmish game, usually when you're building your force, you don't have any vehicles, which is a big difference than, say, a lot of the army games. In the fantasy armies, you might have these huge chariots, or you have these huge monsters, which are not really vehicles, but within the scope of the whole thing, they're basically like a vehicle. Granted, I'm generally a sci-fi guy, so if I see in a game a dragon, I'm like, well, that's a vehicle. But, that's maybe just my own perspective. The trick is with a skirmish game is you rarely have vehicles in a skirmish game. There are some here and there, but not a ton. So, are there any examples of skirmish games that I might show you? As it turns out, there are. As it turns out, I've got at least a couple that are technically kind of within arm's reach. Well, I had to move them over there, so now they're here. But before they were over there, and now they're right here. So, one that I play a good amount is called Malifaux. Now this is what they call a crew box. This is the Hired Swords crew. I got this at Gen Con a couple of years ago, right when it came out. And this is the Victorias, and 3 girls, and another one. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 5, 7 miniatures in here. There's 7 figures in this box, okay? This box, the crews for Malifaux run between $40 and $50 American, depending on the size of the crew, depending on probably how much plastic there is, but that's what a crew generally costs. This is playable. You have to put them together and paint them and all that stuff, but this is a playable force that you could start, once you get them done or whatever, you could start playing against opponents straight out of this box. So you need this box. You also need the instruction booklet. This is the big version. They make a big version of the instruction booklet, and then they make a small version. This one is like $40. The small one is $15. Doesn't have any of the fluff, and it doesn't have, like, the back of this is a lot of information about all of the figures that came out when the new edition came out. This is the second edition of Malifaux. Malifaux has been around for a while. Weird miniatures. Honestly, I always like to talk about how Games Workshop I generally don't like as a company, but they do make some of the seriously best miniatures in the world. They make the best figures out there. Weird is really giving them a run for their money. Their new plastics are astounding. They're a little harder to put together than what you might be used to because they are so fine and so dynamic. But the fact of the matter is they are making some amazing plastics. So, $40, $40 to $50. So right here, let's say on a good day, that's a $90 investment. Keep that in mind. We'll get back to that number. Another cool skirmish game that was also seriously like right here in the basement is Mercs, from what used to be Mercs Minis, but is now called MegaCon Games because they've moved into other things besides just making this. They made a couple of board game, miniature game hybrids like Myth, which you've probably heard about, had a very successful Kickstarter. There was also Mercs Recon, which is like kind of a hybrid-y board game, miniature game version of this. But this was the original, and this was a skirmish game. This book retails $35, and it's a hardcover. And it's full color inside. It's a really nice book, $35. And then there's the box of minis. You buy one of these. This is a starter for the ISS crew. I want to make sure I didn't have that upside down. And the ISS crew, you get, I think, you get 6 models in this box. Plus you get dice, you get cards for the guys, the whole deal. These boxes, depending which crew you get, go between, I was looking at the website before, $70 and $80. Okay, so 35, let's say 70, let's say 80, just to be, conservative. So we're looking here at 35 and 80, carry the 9. That's like 115 bucks, I think. Again, remember that number. There are plenty of other skirmish games, and some of them I don't actually own and have laying around here in the basement. Anima Tactics, that's one that's, I think, from a French company. It's very anime-based, great, very, very, very fancy, really nice models. You don't see it played, I don't see it played around here at all, like where I live, but I do see it at Gen Con quite a bit. I see it sometimes even at Adepticon. Infinity, that's a Spanish company, I believe, Corvus Belli, and they make a game with, again, your normal 30 millimeter type figures, very sci-fi, very skirmish. None of this, well, I move my entire squad over here. It's all, this guy does this, and then this guy does this. That's the difference between army-style games and skirmish games. Skirmish games, besides the fact that there are fewer guys to build and fewer guys to paint, fewer guys to carry around, fewer guys to buy, you also move each guy individually in most situations. So I'm going to go over here and fire at that direction at that guy who's up on that thing, and as opposed to like, well, I move this, shoebox full of guys forward, and then we roll a bunch of dice. It's a different play style. It's not just fewer miniatures. It's a much different, more dynamic play style. Other ones that I can think of, see, I've said Infinity, I've said Anima Tactics. There's tons of them, and I'm not going to remember all of them because I did not do a lot of research other than figuring out what the prices on all this stuff was so that I can tell you. What else are Another one, they don't have to be fantasy and sci-fi all the time. Another good skirmish game that does kind of break the rule a little bit because there's usually a vehicle involved, Bolt Action by Warlord Games. Bolt Action is a World War II game, but unlike Flames of War, which I'm generally a fan of, where you've got tiny, tiny little guys, you've got normal 30 millimeter type guys, and you have maybe a squad of 6, 7, 8 on your team, and then maybe a vehicle, like a small tank or something like that, and you go up against another player who does the same type of thing. Skirmish games, generally, you don't usually have more than a dozen figures in your army. Same with your opponent. That's usually the way it works. A game that kind of started skirmishy and then sort of switched gears was War Machine, if you're familiar with that, from Privateer Press. When that game first came out 10 years ago or so, you pretty much, you had like a couple of jacks and a warjack, or maybe you added a couple more things. So maybe you had 6, 7, 8 figures in your force, and that was the way that it was kind of designed, and that was great. The trick is that over time, from what I understand, and when I used to play and when I haven't played anymore, War Machine has grown, and now your average force is 20, 30 figures, because the warjacks, the big hulking kind of robot steam-powered dudes, are not generally as important as having more and more groups of smaller, figures. The trick is with skirmish games is that most gaming companies would prefer you to buy more models than fewer models. They would like you to buy a lot of stuff. And so if you have a game that you really don't need a lot of stuff, it's a little bit more difficult sometimes, I think, for them to try to look at that bottom line and go, well, yeah, okay, let's make it easier. But when you're a smaller company, you can kind of do that. When you're a big company like Games Workshop, you have a tendency to stay away from skirmish games because if a person can spend maybe, I don't know, $90 or $115 and get pretty much everything they need to play to start, that's a lot different than your average outlay for, say, something like Games Workshop's 40,000. Warhammer 40,000. Warhammer 40,000, the main book these days, I believe, retails for $85. Okay? So that's $5 cheaper than starting in Malifaux and getting a book and an entire force to play with. Then you need a codex, which is the book that tells you about your specific army. Those go around $50. Some go as high as $60. Okay? So now you've spent, at this point, $145. Boom, right there, just to get the 2 books you need. Now you have to start buying models. An average box of, let's say, 10 Space Marines is still $35 or more right now, okay? You need, in an average force, between 40 and 70 models in some situations, depending on how high of a game you play. Obviously, there's something called Combat Patrol, which is a style of Warhammer 40K, and it's becoming very popular in my local shop again because it's only a 500-point list. So you're going to roll in with maybe as few as 7, 8, 10 models. And your average player can kind of, especially if they're new, can get their head around that. They can go, okay, I can pay 10 guys. That's cool. I can do that. But when you say to them, you're going to start building an army, you're going to drop $600 on it, and that's before you buy the books. And that's daunting. It's very daunting to a lot of people. That's why I think skirmish games are getting so popular. You're seeing more and more companies pop up. Every year when I go to Adepticon, there's another couple of companies, which frankly I can't remember all of them. Wrath of Kings, that was a recent one at Adepticon. They're a cool company. They're done by Cool Mini or Not. They're a cool game. And they have fishmen. I'm always a fan of models that are basically fishmen. I don't know why. But that game is designed to be scalable where you can play it with 10 models, but you can also play it with 70, per side or whatever. But that idea, that concept of like, maybe you don't need 200 models in your force, that's becoming much more popular with the game players, the game builders, the people who are actually putting all this and buying it and learning it. That's becoming more popular. And so therefore it's becoming more popular with the small companies because they're trying to kind of pick up those people who don't want to play the big games as much anymore because they've had it. What's going to be interesting is whether or not the big companies start to realize that maybe we should look back into skirmishes because otherwise we're going to get our lunch eaten by these smaller companies. And over time, that can really have an effect. All you have to understand, though, is that skirmish games are great for you if that's what you're interested in. If you need to see 300 swords pointing at the sky on a single table, yeah, you don't want to play a skirmish game. But if you want to take some time and paint each guy and just not have to worry about trying to spray paint them all blue and then go, take some time, personalize, do that stuff, and then have this small force, do it for a little bit of money, I have fun with it. I think you can as well.